If you find yourself longing for an era when the White House embodied stability and dignity, this narrative will transport you there. Because Barack's handling of Trump's Michelle insult was quintessentially Obama, intelligent, composed, and impossible to forget. This was among those occasions everyone had anticipated, the variety where excitement hummed throughout the space well before commencement. The venue was magnificent, saturated with refined illumination and columns of attendees, all awaiting something significant. Recording devices positioned themselves. Journalists murmured into communication equipment, and the crowd whispered gently as platform lighting intensified. President Donald Trump materialized with his characteristic vigor, gesturing toward the masses, displaying that self-assured demeanor he'd become recognized for. Not distant from his position sat former President Barack Obama, tranquil, gathered, his signature poise unwavering as ever. These two individuals hadn't occupied a shared platform in years, and this marked their initial meeting since Trump's White House return. The strain was impossible to overlook. The gathering ostensibly centered on governance, on America's path forward during fractured times. Yet everyone recognized that positioning Trump and Obama together would transcend mere courteous dialogue. Their backgrounds stretched deep and contained pointed confrontations, and every observer present watched to witness what would unfold. When Obama delivered his opening remarks, his tone maintained that familiar steady warmth audiences had yearned for. He avoided accusations or condemnation. Rather, he addressed accountability, discussing how genuine leaders cultivate optimism rather than anxiety. His delivery was controlled, yet his statements possessed understated power. He addressed consideration, emphasizing that governance isn't ego-driven but service-oriented. Attendees acknowledged his points through nods. Several smiled. Even certain Trump allies appeared absorbed by his verbal cadence. Obama possessed that uncommon capacity to capture focus without volume elevation, compelling attention through delivery method rather than mere content. Upon conclusion, the recognition was substantial and authentic. Yet Trump's expression conveyed an alternate narrative. He applauded momentarily, then inclined toward an assistant for whispered communication. His features contracted slightly, that familiar appearance when challenged. Then arrived his opportunity. The instant his identification was proclaimed, the atmosphere transformed noticeably. Trump rose swiftly, fastened his coat, and approached the platform with the certainty of someone assured of audience engagement. Regardless of universal agreement, he commenced by celebrating his administration's accomplishments following his typical pattern, enumerating figures, data points, and triumphs. His volume exceeded Obama's, his movements more pronounced, his tone more cutting. He desired the focal point and claimed it forcefully. Initially, the crowd absorbed his words respectfully, but as Trump's address continued, his approach began shifting. The praise transformed into contrasts, and the contrasts evolved into barely concealed criticisms. He referenced how certain leaders discuss harmony, yet accomplished minimal progress. The audience murmured softly. Everyone comprehended his target. Then, almost nonchalantly, he altered direction. And that's when circumstances pivoted. Trump stated, certain individuals appreciate discussing sophistication and elegance, but they possessed 8 years for demonstration. And what materialized? Merely rhetoric. Even the First Lady of that period, she invested more energy composing literature than addressing challenges. The room fell silent. The reference to Michelle Obama's identity, even obliquely, extracted sharp inhalations from numerous attendees. Trump's provocations weren't unusual, but this particular strike felt intimate. He smiled faintly afterward, as though challenging response. Every gaze rotated toward Obama, yet he remained motionless. No frown materialized. Not even postural adjustment occurred. He sat absolutely still, absorbing, observing, waiting. That stillness itself appeared to communicate more powerfully than any interruption could achieve. Trump proceeded. Detecting the quietness, he supplemented. Certain people inherited charisma and oratory skills. Others inherited leadership capacity and result generation. His statements wrapped themselves in mockery, and though he avoided repeating the designation, his target remained transparent. Several audience members chuckled anxiously, uncertain about appropriate reaction. Others whispered discreetly. The pressure intensified like a gradually building tempest. Obama's countenance maintained composure. His expression revealed zero irritation indicators, yet anyone familiar with his patterns recognized that such silence signified something developing. Not fury, but contemplation. He was constructing his counter, not hastening its delivery. Trump continued for additional minutes, alternating between achievement boasting and subtle, cutting references toward his predecessor. The extended his monologue, the more evident it became. This transcended political address. This was intimate. Behind the platform, assistants shifted with discomfort. The coordinators hadn't anticipated such sharp trajectory so rapidly. The facilitator glanced nervously between both individuals, uncertain about intervention versus observation. By Trump's conclusion, the atmosphere felt electrically charged, like the instant preceding thunder's arrival. He concluded with a smile and swift wave, visibly satisfied with his execution. But Obama still hadn't vocalized anything. He simply reclined marginally in his position, offered a minimal nod, and glanced toward the speaking area. It wasn't anger's expression, something deeper emerged, communicating, "I registered your words, and when I speak, attention will be mandatory." The camera magnified, capturing his serene face beside Trump's confident expression. It presented a contrast portrait. One individual loud and intense, the other quiet and steady. Everyone in that space recognized one certainty. Obama wasn't finished. He was waiting deliberately, patiently for the precise moment. When that instant arrived, it would transform the evening's entire atmosphere. The tension had merely commenced. Trump had concluded his address with a victorious expression, acknowledging the crowd as though he'd delivered the evening's decisive strike. But in that chamber filled with flashing photography equipment and uncertain faces, celebration felt impossible. Something about his Michelle Obama reference, or more accurately, the way he avoided direct naming while ensuring everyone understood his target, made the atmosphere heavy. It transcended mere word selection. It was the inflection, the smirk, the half-laughter that followed. For political veterans, it felt familiar. Trump's characteristic maneuver to disguise offense as honesty, to blend humor with degradation, to present a strike as mere jest. While certain supporters laughed softly, others adjusted positions, uncertain about boundaries. Trump lingered at the platform momentarily longer, surveying the space. His vision located Obama positioned calmly near the front. Something about Obama's stillness appeared to irritate him, as though silence itself constituted challenge. Trump inclined forward, gripping the audio device, his voice adopting that sharp quality again. "You know," he declared, "certain individuals enjoy performing saintly, discussing elevation. But perhaps that messaging emerges because they've never descended sufficiently to comprehend the remainder of us." The crowd gasped again. Everyone recognized the phrase, "When they go low, we go high." Michelle Obama's celebrated statement repeated during the nation's most fractured periods. It had evolved into a hope symbol for millions. And now Trump had contorted it into mockery. The offense didn't sound loud, yet it struck forcefully. It wasn't solely against Michelle Obama, it targeted everything she represented. The message was transparent, her compassion was frailty, her dignity a facade. Certain crowd members attempted applause, uncertain about encouragement versus uncomfortable silence coverage. Others sat paralyzed. Several journalists exchanged glances, documenting notes with slightly trembling hands. They recognized the implications. Obama didn't move. His hands remained folded, his bearing relaxed, yet something in his vision, a quiet intensity, like someone absorbing not merely words but underlying motivations. He'd endured years of public assault previously. He'd heard worse. But what differentiated this instance was Trump's choice to involve Michelle, not as political adversary, but as a woman, a parent, a grace symbol who'd remained above disturbance even when directly targeted. Trump wasn't finished. He scanned the space again, absorbing attention. "You know," he added with a chuckle, "I never comprehended why people created such significance about her addresses. Pleasant words, certainly, but actions, minimal evidence." That sentence descended like a stone penetrating still water. The ripples spread instantly. The audience began murmuring. Some frowned, others avoided visual contact, pretending device examination. Everyone recognized Trump's statements were unjust, even harsh. But no one dared vocalize opposition. Obama maintained perfect stillness. His calmness now felt electric, almost unsettling. It wasn't the calm of indifference. It was the calm of deep concern, yet refusing to permit anger to dominate the instant. Internally, though, he was processing not about retaliation, but about response methodology that would transcend chaos while still addressing truth. Because for Obama, such instances weren't about vengeance. They concerned character. The recording equipment continued operation. Trump, sensing room agitation, smiled wider. He discussed robust leadership and authentic communication. He suggested the nation required more action and fewer motivational statements. But by now, most people weren't genuinely absorbing his words. They were observing Obama, anticipating. Obama finally elevated his gaze and connected with Trump's vision. It was a straightforward glance, yet it communicated volumes. It wasn't rebellious and it wasn't submissive, just steady. The expression of someone who'd already determined this conclusion even before commencement. That glance made Trump hesitate. For the initial time that evening, his rhythm fractured. He paused mid-statement, glanced toward his notes, and cleared his throat. A faint, awkward chuckle slipped through his words as recovery attempts commenced. The instant didn't extend long, but everyone witnessed it. That tiny confidence fracture. Trump concluded his remarks rapidly afterward. The recognition was courteous but uncertain. As he returned to his position, he looked toward Obama again, attempting interpretation. Obama only nodded slightly as though acknowledging the statements while refusing to let them persist. Michelle Obama's name still suspended in the atmosphere like an unextinguished spark. It wasn't forgotten, it was waiting. The crowd recognized something approached. Obama had remained silent excessively long, and his silence exceeded any shout's volume. A reporter positioned near the front whispered to another, "He's going to counter, just observe." And they were correct. Obama had always believed timing mattered more than volume. He wouldn't interrupt, he wouldn't react during heated moments. He would wait until perfect silence descended. Then he would speak. But before that instant materialized, there was something powerful about his seated presence, reminding everyone in that chamber, and everyone who'd ever underestimated him, that patience can constitute the sharpest weapon of all. As recognition faded and Trump reclined in his chair, the cameras captured one final image before transitioning. Obama's calm, contemplative face and Trump's manufactured grin beside him. Two individuals, two completely different power varieties. One shouted for audibility, the other waited for remembrance. And though no one could predict it yet, the words Obama was preparing to deliver would resonate far more powerfully than any offense spoken that night. The chamber still buzzed from Trump's statements, though the applause had extinguished rapidly, like a spark smothered before flame development. People shifted positions, uncertain about extended applause versus pretending the previous minutes hadn't occurred. The tension was almost tangible, the variety that envelops you and makes even respiration feel excessive. Trump had returned to his position, self-satisfied, whispering something to an assistant beside him. He appeared relaxed, almost smug, like a performer believing the show had concluded. But it hadn't. Far from it, because Barack Obama remained there, silent, steady, and unreadable. For an extended moment, nothing transpired. The facilitator glanced nervously between both individuals, detecting unease rippling through the audience. Then, as though the silence itself had invited him, Obama stood. The murmuring ceased immediately. All eyes rotated toward him. He didn't rush, didn't clear his throat, or raise a hand for attention. He simply walked to the platform, calm and purposeful, as though he'd already determined that every forthcoming word mattered. When he commenced speaking, his voice was subdued and level. "You know," he stated, "discussing leadership is simple when the spotlight's on you. It's more challenging when observation is absent, when your selections define your identity, not your recognition." The audience leaned closer. His tone wasn't angry, but it possessed quiet weight that compelled attention without blinking. He addressed integrity, about responsibility accompanying power. He discussed how genuine leaders face judgment not by their statements, but by their treatment of those who can offer nothing in return. And then, without warning, he directed his vision straight toward Trump. His expression didn't alter, but his voice adopted a sharper edge, not louder, just more distinct. "You invested time discussing my wife," he stated softly. "But here's something I'd appreciate you considering." The chamber froze. Obama paused for just a second, long enough for everyone to suspend breathing. Then he delivered it slowly, clearly, every word descending like a water drop in a still pond. "Tell Barron who his real mother is." The silence that followed didn't feel real. It was the variety of silence that evacuates the atmosphere, the variety that makes people forget movement. Trump's smile vanished. His head jerked slightly, his face tightening as though he hadn't heard correctly. A ripple coursed through the crowd. A mixture of confusion, disbelief, and shock. Obama didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The weight of the inquiry hung there, substantial and purposeful. It required only a moment for people to comprehend his meaning. This wasn't a random inquiry. It was a reminder, a sharp, cutting reminder of the strange and uncomfortable statements Trump himself had made years ago about his daughter Ivanka. Remarks that many had found deeply unsettling, even disturbing. Remarks that had followed him for years, whispered about in conversations but rarely spoken to his face. Obama hadn't insulted Trump. He hadn't raised his voice or called him names. He had simply turned the mirror around and forced him to see himself. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Even his assistant seemed frozen. Several people in the audience shifted awkwardly, uncertain what to do. No one had expected this. No one had expected Obama to strike with so much precision, quietly, cleanly, without a single shout. For several long seconds it felt like the world had stopped moving. Obama just stood there, his eyes steady, his face calm, letting the silence do the work for him. The power of that moment was in how little he said. The line wasn't long, but its meaning ran deep. It wasn't just about Trump's family or his past comments. It was about hypocrisy. It was about how someone who so easily insulted others never stopped to see the cracks in his own glass house. Several people in the back began to applaud. Softly at first, then louder. It wasn't the wild cheering variety of applause that fills a chamber. It was slower, more deliberate, like a shared understanding passing from person to person. Trump's expression hardened. His usual confidence seemed to crumble for just an instant. He leaned forward, his voice rising as he stated, "That's an insult. You're discussing my family." Obama didn't flinch. He simply replied, "I'm discussing truth, and truth doesn't insult, it reveals." The crowd reacted again, some with gasps, others with nods. It was like a spark had reignited, but this time it wasn't fueled by anger. It was respect for the way Obama had transformed a personal attack into a powerful lesson. Trump attempted recovery, forcing a laugh. You see how disrespectful he is, he declared, gesturing toward the audience. Typical Obama, always thinks he's clever. But no one laughed with him. The attempt at humor fell flat, echoing awkwardly in the silence that followed. Obama offered a small, almost invisible nod, as though acknowledging that the exchange was complete. He stepped back from the platform, his expression calm, his voice once again steady. There's a difference, he stated quietly, between confidence and arrogance. One earns respect, the other demands it and loses it in the process. And with that, he walked back to his seat. No one moved for several seconds. Then slowly the applause began again. Stronger this time, almost reluctant at first, then growing as more people joined in. It wasn't the noise of victory, it was the sound of realization. Trump sat still, his eyes fixed on the stage, his jaw tight. For once, he didn't have a comeback ready. Obama's words had landed exactly where they needed to, not shouted into the air, but planted like a seed that would linger long after the lights dimmed. In that single exchange, he hadn't just answered Trump's insult. He had rewritten the tone of the entire night. Everyone in that room knew it. The moment Obama's words settled, the air seemed to change. You could almost feel it, like the room had lost all its oxygen for a second. The echo of his final sentence still hung there, calm, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Trump was sitting stiffly, his jaw locked, his face redder than usual. His hand tapped on the table, not in rhythm but with irritation, like he was searching for control and couldn't find it. The audience didn't know where to look. Some were still frozen in disbelief. Others whispered to one another, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The contrast between the two men was impossible to miss. Obama's calm confidence still lingered like a quiet shadow, while Trump's unease grew with every passing second. Trump leaned forward, gripping his microphone again. His smile had returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he began, "I think we've all had enough lectures for one night." He forced out a laugh, hoping to win the crowd back. That was a nice speech from the former president. Very poetic, very dramatic, but maybe a little too personal, don't you think? His tone was casual, but the edge was sharp. The crowd didn't respond. A few of his supporters tried to clap, but it sounded weak, out of place. Trump pressed on, his words tumbling faster now. "I mean, we all respect families here, right? I would never bring someone's family into politics. Never." That was too much for some people. A murmur ran through the room, the kind that carries disbelief more than noise. Everyone remembered what had happened just minutes ago. The insults aimed at Michelle Obama, the smirk, the sarcasm. His denial only made the contrast clearer. Obama didn't interrupt, didn't roll his eyes, just watched. Quiet, composed, like a man who had already said everything that needed to be said. And maybe that was what made it worse for Trump, the stillness. The way Obama's calmness made his own words sound desperate. Trump cleared his throat again, trying to push through. "Anyway," he stated, "I think we've made our points tonight. Some people deliver beautiful speeches. I prefer results. That's why the people chose me again, because we get things done." There was polite clapping this time, and it felt forced, like applause meant to fill silence rather than express support. Obama then turned slightly toward him, his voice low but clear enough for the microphones to pick up. "You said you never bring families into it," he stated softly. "You already did." The crowd gasped again. Trump opened his mouth to reply, but Obama continued before he could speak. "The more you talk," he stated evenly, "the more you reveal the truth." That sentence hit Trump harder than any direct insult could. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was simply true, and truth, when spoken calmly, has a way of stripping away everything else. Trump's expression flickered. For a moment, he looked almost lost, the practiced confidence slipping away before he quickly put the smile back on. He gave a short, nervous laugh. "Well," he stated, "I guess that's one way to look at it." The moderator, clearly uncomfortable, tried to move the discussion along. "Gentlemen, perhaps we can." But Trump wasn't done. "No, no," he stated quickly, holding up a hand. "Let me finish." His voice rose a little too much. "I think we've all seen how the media loves to twist words. They'll take one sentence, one joke, and turn it into something ugly. But that's what they do. That's what they've always done to me." The audience watched silently. He was rambling now, trying to steer the narrative, to shift the spotlight back into his control. But the problem was, Obama had already set the tone, and Trump, for all his bluster, couldn't take it back. Backstage, assistants shifted uncomfortably. The organizers whispered about whether the broadcast could be edited before it aired. "We'll cut that part," one staffer stated nervously. "The president doesn't want that line getting out." Another nodded. "We'll handle it." But it was too late. Too many cameras, too many witnesses. The words were already alive. You can't erase something that powerful once it's spoken in front of a crowd. Meanwhile, Obama had leaned back, his demeanor completely unchanged. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who had come for a calm conversation, not a fight. And somehow, that made his presence even stronger. Trump, on the other hand, looked restless. His smile faded again. He whispered to one of his aides sitting nearby, his voice low but tense. The aide nodded quickly, clearly uncomfortable. The moderator tried again to wrap things up. "Thank you, gentlemen," she stated, her voice steady but nervous. "Let's move to closing remarks." Obama stood first, walked to the podium one last time, and the room quieted immediately. He didn't mention Trump. He didn't mention the exchange. Instead, he spoke directly to the audience. "We can disagree on policy," he stated. "We can argue about ideas. But when we lose respect, when we lose empathy, we lose the very thing that makes us strong." The applause came naturally this time. It started softly, then grew until it filled the room. There was no anger in it, no tension, just appreciation. Trump stayed seated. He clapped slowly, his expression blank, his eyes distant. For once, he didn't have a comeback ready. Later that evening, whispers spread that Trump had ordered parts of the event to be removed from official broadcasts. Some claimed he was furious, blaming his staff for not stopping Obama's response sooner. Others said he had thrown his notes on the floor backstage and stormed off. But Obama, he left the venue quietly, greeting people as he passed. He smiled, shook hands, and thanked the organizers. To him, the matter was over. He'd said what needed to be said, and nothing more. By the time he stepped outside, the air felt lighter, the kind of stillness that follows after a storm has passed. He looked up briefly, almost as if taking in the calm night sky, and then he simply walked away. In that moment, the difference between the two men was clearer than ever. One fought for control, the other never needed it. The night after the confrontation, the world seemed quieter. But only on the surface. Beneath that calm, people were still replaying every word, every glance, every second of the exchange between Donald Trump and Barack Obama. The event had ended hours earlier, yet the moment still lived in people's minds, like an echo that refused to fade. Those who had been in the audience spoke about it in hushed tones, like they'd witnessed something rare. Not just a clash of two powerful men, but a glimpse into what leadership really looks like when it's tested. Even some of those who hadn't agreed with Obama before were admitting, almost reluctantly, that what he had done that night took a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't shout but still commands a room. Some said Trump's words were typical of him. Fiery, unfiltered, made to provoke. Others felt that Obama's response had crossed a line. But no one could deny one thing. The entire room had seen the power of restraint outshine the force of anger. That next morning, news programs spoke cautiously about the heated exchange. But most people didn't need analysis to understand what they had seen. They could feel it. Something about the contrast between Trump's defiance and Obama's calm had struck a nerve. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about character. Obama's final message from that night, about respect and empathy, was replayed endlessly. People were sharing clips of his quiet composure, his clear eyes, his unshaken tone. In a world used to shouting matches, his silence had been louder than anyone's voice, and that was the real story. The confrontation wasn't a victory for either man in the usual sense. There was no applause meter, no scoreboard. But the difference in their approaches revealed something deeper about the state of leadership itself. Trump's instinct had always been to dominate, to win the argument by talking over his opponent, by turning everything into a show. Obama's instinct, however, had always been to wait, to watch, to listen, and to strike only when it mattered most. In that moment on stage, people had seen two versions of power standing side by side. One believed that if power was about control, the other believed it was about principle. As the hours passed, the impact spread. Students at universities discussed it in classrooms. Professors used it as an example of communication under pressure. Analysts talked about the art of the pause, referring to Obama's ability to let silence carry his message. Even longtime political commentators admitted that they hadn't seen such a composed takedown in years. Trump, meanwhile, stayed mostly out of sight that day. Reports from inside the White House described a tense atmosphere. Some said he had demanded to know who had allowed the full footage to air. Others claimed he had called the exchange a setup. His aides avoided eye contact, knowing that any comment might spark another wave of anger. But the truth was simple. No one had forced Trump to say what he did, and no one had forced Obama to respond the way he did. It was all there. Two men, two choices, and one unforgettable moment. As for Michelle Obama, she didn't respond publicly either. She didn't need to. Those who admired her knew that her silence spoke volumes, just as it always had. In a way, her quiet strength had been defended, without her having to lift a finger. Barack Obama had done it for her. Not through anger, but through dignity. In the days that followed, people began to reflect. Many realized how rare it is to see leaders handle personal attacks without losing their cool. It reminded them of something Obama had once said years ago. Being strong doesn't mean you have to be loud. That sentence, forgotten by some, now felt more relevant than ever. The story became more than a political moment. It became a mirror. It made people think about how they react when someone insults them, whether in their personal lives or in their communities. Do they lash out, or do they wait? think and choose their words carefully. There was something universal about it. The way Obama had waited for the right time to speak, the way he had used truth instead of insult. It reminded people of how maturity looks in action. He had shown that leadership isn't about who shouts the loudest, but about who can stand tall when provoked. Even some of Trump's critics, while angry at his words, recognized that this wasn't just about him. It was about how power tests people, how it brings out who they truly are. And that night, it had brought out two very different kinds of men. One used words like weapons, the other used silence like armor. By the end of the week, the story had taken on a life of its own. People were quoting Obama's line, "The more you talk, the more you reveal the truth," in classrooms, offices, and even at dinner tables. It became a quiet mantra for those tired of shouting matches and endless arguments. In a way, the whole confrontation had become a lesson without ever being called one. It reminded people that in a divided world, composure is not weakness, it's strength, and that sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that lasts the longest. For Obama, it wasn't about winning. It never had been. His goal was to remind the audience, and perhaps even Trump himself, that leadership isn't measured by dominance, but by dignity. And as the lights of that event faded into memory, one truth remained clear. Insults may echo for a while, but respect leaves a mark that never fades. It wasn't the loudest man who owned the night. It was the quietest one. Long after the camera stopped rolling, people still remembered how that silence felt. Powerful, steady, and unforgettable.